The interview you're about to watch is a discussion I had with Bret Contreras. Bret Contreras is known as the glute guy, but he has a PhD in sports science. He's certified through the NSCA as a strength and conditioning specialist with distinction. He's authored a few books. He has over 22 years of experience in personal training, and he's published numerous papers in regards to exercise science. So I'm not a researcher by any means, and I would consider myself most accurately as an evidence-based practitioner. So I utilize science as a guideline and find what's practical for my clients to get them in shape. So I consider Bret a good friend of mine and a mentor. A lot of my knowledge in regards to training programming and glute training can be attributed to Bret. I remember first being exposed to him back in 2009 when he wrote the Dispelling the Glute Myth article on T-Nation, which seems like forever ago. And he was promoting hip thrusts back then too, and I think even years before that. And I think that's the article that made him pretty much go viral. And as a person that coaches a lot of bikini clients and girls that just want to get in shape, I find the information that Bret's put out very helpful. In the past 3 years, I've attended 4 of Bret's seminars as well as read all of his research. I've also been out to his gym called the Glute Lab in San Diego, and Bret's always been a very generous and welcoming guy to me.
Welcome to my Glute Lab, come on in.
I can't think of one time where he's actually insulted me, belittled me, or made me feel like I was just beneath him. In all seriousness though, Bret's always been super nice to me over the years. Last year in May, I asked him to do a podcast and he was very willing to do it. And whenever I'm in San Diego, he's always inviting me out to Glute Lab to train. And when I set up this interview with him, he almost immediately said yes. So we knocked it out that night. And the topics we covered in this interview are training volume, how much is too much, and deloads. I wanted to ask him more questions and we could have talked for hours, but I think these two subjects really covered a lot of time. Bret and I see eye to eye on a lot of things, and especially combining research with experience.
There's one thing what the science says, but I'm working with real people all the time.
Exactly, and that's one thing I actually respect about you is that you have your years of anecdote and then you also have the research part of it as well, and you like to blend the two.
Yeah, and I think that's rare in our field. There you've got,
I agree.
And it's frustrating when you have some scientists that think you can learn about strength and conditioning through reading research papers. Like you can't replace, you got to spend your time in the gym training yourself and others.
So I really hope you enjoy this interview. I put a lot of time into it. I'm not the best editor. I actually have the editing skills of a Doge, but I think this video came out pretty good. If you find this video helpful, all I ask is that you share it on social media so it can help out more people. Here's Bret Contreras.
Blinking red, so that should be, right?
And then that's fine, we're centered well.
Yes.
Do I look
Should
bigger?
we sit up or?
Do I look bigger than Bret?
Yes, obviously. I zoomed it in a little bit. Ooh, looking good, all right.
Awesome. Hey guys, I'm here with Bret Contreras, known as the Glute Guy. Why don't you introduce yourself, Bret?
Thanks for having me, David. So I'm known as the Glute Guy. I have my PhD in sports science, my CSCS with distinction from the NSCA. So I'm known for glutes, but I actually love all things strength training and sports science related. I read a lot of research. I own a gym. I live in the gym, and I've been personal training for 22 years now and studying the research pretty hard for about 12 years now. So
Bret's the guy, like he's almost like a mentor to me. Pretty much like all I've learned from like programming, like training is a lot due to Bret and guys like Brad Schoenfeld too. So thanks for coming on, man.
From all of my friends, so yeah, it's who I learned from as well.
Yeah, so Bret and I recorded a podcast, I think it was last May. So with this video, I just wanted to set it up as a Q&A. So I'm just gonna roll down some questions and let Bret do the talking. Let's see, first question. I know a lot of people, you have a problem with this too. They do too much volume and too much frequency. And what problems do we experience when we do that?
So this is something I've kind of, I started, like probably 5 years ago, I was telling women to train glutes 5 days a week. The optimal number of days per week was 5 days a week. But it's funny because we barely have any research on the glutes. So we just assume that a lot of the research is on like the quads or the biceps or triceps or the pecs. And then we just assume that this applies to all muscle groups. That's one of the pet peeves I have with like, you know, because I'm always focusing on glutes. Mm-hmm. And they have different architecture, different, they operate on different ends of the length tension curve and things like that. So They have different EMG angle relationships. So like with the glutes, you get maximum activation at end range. A lot of muscles, you get maximum activation in a stretch. They have different moment arm relationships. So you can't just assume, and then they're just a bigger muscle, and they seem to be able to handle a lot. So you can't always assume that the research on one muscle group applies to another. But what do? We have to go by something. And so there aren't many reasons. So here's what I form my opinion on. What I see in the gym and how how my clients and my members to my programs and see results. And then also, you're always biased by your own training too.
Right.
You can't dissociate the way you train, what makes sense to you and what you feel. That plays a large role in how you like to program. But hopefully you train enough people to realize how unique we all are. But I also go by the research, and our colleagues Brad Schoenfeld and James Krieger published a meta-analysis, showing that there's not a lot of evidence that supports training. There's a lot of evidence showing that training 2 days a week is better than 1 day a week, but not a lot of evidence showing training 3 days a week or 4 or 5 is better than 2. Mm-hmm. And whether the goal is strength or hypertrophy changes a little bit, because maybe with strength you get a little more practice and skill work, but for hypertrophy, there's not much evidence. But then Greg Nuckols posted a blog post, and he used a different statistical analysis and different inclusion criteria, and he did show some evidence for when he examined it his way, he did find evidence that training more frequently was better. But then you have all these different opinions, You've got bodybuilders who train a muscle 1 day a week, and they're the most jacked people on the planet.
Yeah.
You can say, oh well, they're all on steroids, but even natural bodybuilders, a lot of them train that way.
That was me in my early 20s, so.
And then you have, guys like my friend Menno Henselmans who's saying train a muscle every day. Now the problem I have with that is that's easy to say when you're younger, but when I'm 42, you need a couple of days off. It just beats up your joints too much, and you could say, well, then you're not training properly, but just trust me, it matters. And the goal should be to train for a lifetime, but I like listening to everyone's take on it, but I think first of all, there's a genetic component to how much muscle damage you experience. There's published papers on that, like review articles about the genetics of muscle damage. So you and I could do the same workout, and you are the next day you're not that sore. Well, soreness and muscle damage aren't linearly related, but you're not that sore, you're not that beat down, and I'm crippled, and I can barely lift. And there's also genetics to recovery. So that alone, then we know that things like sleep and stress and nutrition affect it. But then also we know that you and I do the same workout. It doesn't mean we did the workout the exact same way.
Right.
Maybe you push your sets way harder than me, and you watch me lift, and I'm like, I rack it when you can tell I didn't slow down that much, and you know that I had 2 or 3 reps in the tank. So people have this natural, not only this inherentness, is that even a word, about how hard they train, but also you see some grinders out there, like I have a couple clients over the years who they're done, like doing chin-ups, and they're like, ugh, and you're like, okay, they're done, and then they end up getting 2 more, and it's like painful to watch how slow and grindy it is. And then you have other people like me. People are always like, I'll rack the bar with bench, and people are like, damn, you had 2 more in you. No, I hit failure. I would have failed.
Yeah.
But it looks like I have more in the tank. And so, for that reason, and some people train, they think they train to failure, momentary muscular failure, but they're not even close, and they don't know it.
It's like an RPE4.
Yeah, and so I think those people do better with volume, because they're staying far away from failure, or they're not approaching failure. Mm-hmm. And then the people who really do train to failure, they can't do as many sets. And there's been some evidence that has emerged in the literature in the last couple of years on this topic.
So I know you get some criticism on some of your routines because you only include 5 exercises. And then some of these people get it and they're like, oh, this is too easy. This is something you talked about earlier, right? So what would be the solution for people that think your programs are too easy? Is to increase intensity effort or?
So I've trained so many people in my lifetime. And here at Glute Lab, in the last year, I mean, I just made an Instagram post about all the people who've come. And you can see all the people that I trained in the last year here. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty amazing. I've trained the creme de la creme of bikini competitors. And when I train these women, they might be here 1 hour and I might give them 14 sets and they're crushed. Now, these same women, some of these same women might do my glute squat class and do 30 sets, but it's just different. You know, I might have them rest 3 to 5 minutes in between a set because I make them push it so hard. You know, I remember like my client Massa, she sees good results doing high volume but less effort, and then she sees good results pushing it really hard but doing less sets. When I was training her, she moved to Hawaii, but when I was training her, you know, I can't remember one of the workouts I gave her. I just know that 203-pound kettlebell, she deadlifted it for like 20 reps, sumo deadlift. I gave her 45-degree back extensions with a barbell for the first time, and I had to keep adding weight. She used 135 and she got it for like 10 reps. What woman can do 135 pounds for 10 reps on her very first try on barbell 45-degree hypers? Because the barbell is harder than holding a dumbbell. And then, I remember giving her the reverse hyper. And I had, you know, most of my clients, female clients, will use 50 pounds on the reverse hyper. She had to use 180, 245s on each side. But I'd have her do a set, and then she'd be so winded, and then, you know, we'd rest a few minutes and repeat it. So she'd do 14 sets with me and then be crushed. And that's one way of working out. Another way of working out is to not go so hard and just do more volume. But there's an inverse relationship between effort and volume. You can go high effort, lower volume, or lower effort, higher volume, but it's not easy to do both.
What happens if you do both?
Well, that's where the research is kind of conflicted. It's like I was involved in one of the studies with Brad and James, and you know, we saw a dose response effect up to 48 sets a week. But the thing is, you know, it's a short-term study, and you know, James and Brad and I wasn't very vocal about the study, but James and Brad were, and they didn't change it's not like that study got a lot of flack. Mm-hmm. But our hypothesis was that you'd see an inverted U-shaped curve, which is what some other studies have shown. They didn't switch their recommendations and say, everyone should start doing 48 sets a week per muscle. It's likely that you can get away with that for the short term, but also if you looked at the training, the program, I think it was 3 days a week, and you know, they weren't going crazy on overall volume throughout the week. So you might be able to get away with more. Say you don't do a lot for the other muscles, but you specialize in one area. Maybe you can do more volume that way. But there are just a lot of things to consider. And I mean,
from your like personal experience, you know, like outside the studies.
Yeah, outside the research, I don't like. I can do 8 sets for glutes and be destroyed. I can do 4 sets of hip thrusts, 2 sets of like deficit reverse lunges, and 2 sets of you know, like a standing cable hip abduction or seated hip abduction machine, and I'm destroyed. And that's with 8 sets. And if I do that twice a week, that's good for me for glutes. Yeah. And my glutes grew last year substantially from doing like 8 sets twice a week. Yeah. And then I've got women some of my women are doing, you know, 30 sets 3 days a week. So they're doing 90 total sets. And some of them have seen good results. But in my experience with training people, I keep it lower. Now, most of the experts will say, you know, do like 10 to 30 sets a week. A lot of the guys who really put their time and energy into, you know, guys like Mike Israetel and Eric Helms and Well, even James and Brad, they typically say, 20 to 30 sets a week. They don't tell you to do 50 sets a week. But within your volume, this is something that not enough people talk about. Not all volume is created equal, and I've been saying this for a long time. So you got to look at the exercise selection. If you are doing an exercise that is easy in the stretch and harder in the contracted position, for example, think of a lunge. If you did 8 sets of lunges, walking lunges, or like deficit reverse lunges to failure, your glutes would be so sore the next day. But if you did 8 sets of barbell glute bridges, your glutes would likely be sore but not crippled.
There's more muscle damage involved in.
Yeah, the longer length that you reach, and also if it's hard in the stretch, like the torque angle curve or the strength curve is like, think of a squat or a lunge where it's hardest at the bottom and then it gets easier as you come up. Those create more muscle damage. Also, the tempo can affect it. Like if not even just the tempo, but how you perform the exercise. If you kind of like really sink into the stretch and that's your focus, kind of like accentuating the stretch, or like pausing at the bottom, things like that, that might affect it. But and also like using accommodating resistance. So let's say instead of squatting 315, you have 225 on the bar but 100 pounds of chains. Well, at the bottom it's 225, at the top it's 325, but in the stretch it's not as heavy. So you can do more volume with bands when you utilize bands and chains. But if in the case of glutes, when you do banded exercise, think of a lateral band walk. You're not even moving into a stretch, because the glute medius, in order to get stretch, you have to actually go into adduction.
Yeah. So
you're never moving into a stretch, and you only get peak tension at a very short muscle length when you're walking to the side. So those exercises are kind of like what I call penalty-free volume. You can do more sets with them and not get beat up. And when I say get beat up, we used to always say, well, that causes a lot of CNS fatigue, and now that's confusing, because if you're weaker after doing a set or the next day, it can be due to peripheral fatigue, central fatigue, or muscle damage. And it looks like we've kind of according to the research, we tend to put too much stock into that causes way too much CNS fatigue. We don't have a lot of evidence about that, but that's another story. If all you do for legs is heavy squats and deadlifts and lunges, you won't be able to handle nearly as many sets as if instead you did hip thrusts, glute bridges, and abduction work. Mm-hmm. Because those don't work you hard in the stretch. Now, my programs, I try to include both. Mm-hmm. Exercise that work you from a long length and a shorter length, and try to hit the different vectors because they have different torque angle curves and things like that. So for the glutes, I like to hit them with axially or vertical loaded exercises, horizontal or anteroposterior hip extension exercises, and then lateral rotary exercise like with bands and chains and abduction movements and stuff like that. And that tends to develop all the subdivisions and things like that. Also in the case of like delts, you can do isolation work for the front delts, the side delts, the rear delts, and so I think it's just hard to come up with these volume recommendations because we don't know their genetics and their physiology. We don't know their sleep, their stress, and what exercise they're doing, and then how hard they push themselves. So you have to take all these things into consideration, and you also might see the best results if you fluctuate volume. Like my programs, I don't
like
do...
at the UP?
No. Not fluctuating rep ranges, but like with my programs, I tend to have like a deload week where it's like do the exercise but don't go too hard, kind of really focus on form and learn what weight you want to use for your sets for the next week.
Okay.
Then the next 3 weeks, really crush it and push it hard and try to set PRs. So I try to get them to utilize progressive overload through adding load and adding reps.
Okay.
You could also have a plan where it was like, week 1, here's your plan for the month. Week 1, you're doing 2 sets of each exercise. Week 2, you're doing 3 sets. Week 3, you're doing 4 sets, and week 4, you're doing 5. Whatever, I screwed that up. But you add a set per week.
Mm-hmm.
You add a set per week. That would be one way of progression. You're adding more volume, and then you reset again. You might see better results doing it that way, where you fluctuate volume, but you're keeping consistent effort. There's just so many ways to do things, and it's so hard to just come up with, like, any person that thinks they have all the answers and makes black and white statements is a charlatan in our industry.
So do you have any more additional thoughts on the volume conundrum?
Yes, I do. So you have to remember, added volume is good up until the point where you can't recover from it. So you have to realize, like, hell, if like you and I love working out. I would work out for 4 hours a day if I saw better results. Wouldn't you?
Of course.
Yeah, but I don't. And I think a lot of beginners, and also a lot of people who are just trying to lose fat will think the more exercise, the better. But it doesn't work that way, because you're after the best physique, and that involves having muscle too, and keeping your muscle as you lose weight.
Right.
So you always should be training in a way that maximizes muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Either if you're in a surplus, you want to maximize the muscle as opposed to the fat that you gain. If you're recomping at maintenance, you want to maximize, turnover, like where you're putting on muscle and losing fat. And if you're in a deficit, you want to minimize the amount of fat you lose for weight loss and keep as much muscle as possible. So you should always be training according to what we know about hypertrophy. Your training doesn't need to change that much, like, you lift super heavy in the off season while you're bulking and do only compound lifts, and then when you're cutting, you do a ton of isolation reps with
high reps.
Isolation exercises with high reps and low rest periods. It shouldn't be that way, but if you're recovering or not, because are you setting PRs, or are your workouts productive? If you're sore and beat down, your workouts won't be productive. So volume is, people start, it's just like you and I love flexible dieting. I like flexible training too. Some days you don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the gym and you're off. I always like to say every week one of your workouts will suck and one will be awesome. If you think about the month, one of your weeks out of the month will be great, one will suck, a couple will be average. It's just the way things work. We're unpredictable. Sometimes you do everything right over the weekend. You rest, you sleep, you eat a lot, you relax, and you go in on Monday and you think you're going to have an awesome workout, and you're weak. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you do everything wrong and you're like, oh crap, I'm going to suck. I didn't rest enough, I didn't sleep that well, I ate like crap, and then you PR. Or sometimes you're warming up and you're like, I feel great, and you go for that big lift and you're weak.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're warming up and you're like, oh, I don't feel good, and then you set a PR. It's just, physiology is complicated, and so if people learned how to adjust on the fly and listen to their bodies, mm-hmm. they'd see better results instead of stubbornly stick to some rigid schedule. I write workouts for myself every month, and I always, without fail, make it too rigorous, and I can't end up sticking to it. If I did, I would end up getting hurt and backtracking. So the goal is progression, and everyone's different. You might see the best progress if you do 8 sets a week per muscle. Yeah. Most people would never figure that out though, because they'd never be willing to dip that low. Yeah.
And I'm sure you've probably seen where you can like back off on volume on certain people and they start progressing even more, right?
God, I have an amazing case study with that, or anecdote with my client Sammy back in the day. I always refer to Sammy as like my prize bull without sounding derogatory, but she's like she was part of my first glute squad, and she got so strong. But I noticed they trained with me every Monday and Thursday, and on every Thursday she was weak, like really weak. So I'm like, okay, she's beat down, she's not recovered. So I start dropping volume. She saw better results. I dropped it more. She saw better results. Finally, I'm like, we were doing one set of 5 exercises twice a week, and she saw such amazing results. But here's the deal. I would have her do one set of hip thrusts. Like, I'd pick something to try to beat. So I knew that she had done 225 for like 22 reps, 245 for 20 reps, 285 for 12 reps, 335 for 6 reps, 385 for 2 reps. We used an easy bar, so you could only fit so much on there.
Okay.
It was actually that easy bar right there is what we used. But anyway, that was they were training out of my condo in Phoenix, and so the other girls would go, "Why does she only have to do one set? Why do we have to do more?" And I'd be like, "Do you want to just do one set?" Because they really wanted to do more. But I'd say, "Look, if you want to experiment with that, fine, but she can't recover from it. But also look at her, she's using more weight than everyone there. She was freakishly strong." Because this was like 2013 or 2012. This was before Instagram and before, now everyone's hip thrusting like 405, but she was like the first one to do it with good form that I saw on the internet. And so, and she was only like 125 pounds, and I was just amazed at how strong she was for her size. And her glutes, I think, doubled. I have a before and after picture. She had nice glutes to begin with, but I think they doubled in size over the 6 months. I trained that glute squad really hard for 6 straight months. They came twice a week, week in, week out for 6 straight months. And she saw great results. She was doing 10 sets a week, one set of 5 different exercises. And I can tell you the exercises because all I had was my condo. I didn't have a gym. And I had like minimal equipment. So in my bedroom, you can go back on YouTube and find these videos. In my bedroom, I had a lever squat and a glute ham developer. And then
His bedroom.
in my bedroom, yeah. And then in the living room, I put this little bench up against the TV stand. There was a tile floor, and I'd take the easy bar, load it up. They'd have an Eric's balance pad on their hips, and I'd pick the bar up and drop it on them. So they'd start from the top, and then they'd thrust, and then I'd take the bar off of them. And that got really old once they're all using like 225 to 385. I'd be doing like 30 sets of deadlifts, not just deadlifts, but I'd like awkward. I'd have to like walk in between them and put the bar down. So it's like a strongman exercise. But anyway, so I would have them start out in the living room with hip thrusts. So she did hip thrusts, then they do kettlebell deadlifts, and I had the 106 pounder and then I had the 203. So she could do the 106 pounder for 50 reps, kettlebell deadlifts. I had to move her to the 203 pounder. And then she did lever machine squats, back extensions with the dumbbell. And I remember with back extension, she could do 20 reps with holding on to the 100 pounder. That's hard to hold on to.
Yeah.
And then we do band seated hip abductions. We take a long band, the monster mini band, double wrap it around the knees. And they'd sit on my bed because my bed was low to the ground. Okay. They'd sit on my bed and do band-seated hip abductions. So it was those 5 exercises alone.
How long ago was this?
2012 or 13, I believe. Probably 2013.
This was before the original Glute Lab?
In Phoenix, yeah.
Oh.
That was my first glute squad. And then I bought a house, and then the next glute squad, Glute Lab was my garage, 4-car garage gym out of my house, and then I moved here to San Diego and now have this glute lab. But she saw such good results. But if I gave her the workouts that I write for some of my women with like 50 sets, she would be destroyed. I have other clients too and I have I've trained my friend Hattie Boydell and who else? I've got some girls here who can, 50 sets.
You brought some girls to the Olympia stage too, right? Mm-hmm. So there you go.
I've worked with probably 10 different top 10 bikini Olympians. And they're all over the place with my client Tana, she trains super hard, but she can't do a ton of volume. She can't handle, I can't give her 30 sets. She gets sore. So we've had to fine tune with her regimen. it's everywhere on the spectrum. My friend Hattie Boydell, she's crazy. She can handle so many sets. I've never seen any. She's like a mutant. One of the trainers here at Glute Lab, Kiana, she trains so hard and can handle so many sets. But, and then I have other clients like Sohee Lee. She never hurt herself ever until she did a DUP plan and started squatting 3 times a week. She hurt her hips.
Okay.
And then I had her do a powerlifting contest and she hurt her low back because I let her round back. She's so much stronger with round back deadlifts. And she actually pulled 248 pounds at 106 body weight. Mm-hmm. But it hurt her low back. And so now she pulls strict and doesn't round. But she can't handle a ton of volume, and I can't handle a ton of volume, but my sets are really hard.
Right.
So that's what I wish more people would stop worrying about what other people are doing and start worrying about what's the perfect plan for you, because it might be doing way less than you thought. Also, a lot of these people, they're like, oh, that workout's too easy. I'm used to doing 30 sets, and they can't do a pull-up. A lot of these girls, I'll teach them, I'll be like, let me see you military press, and they do the bar for 3 reps. Mm-hmm. It's like, you should be doing the bar for 20 reps, and you should be able to get a few pull-ups.
Right, and then you look at their training programs, and it's like, maybe like 20 different exercises, probably like a circuit type of training. It's like they're not even focusing on the exercise they really need to bring up.
Exactly.
What's your opinion on deloads? Do you prefer to like auto-regulate them, or have them on like set weeks?
Well, if you never officially deload, life will force you into deloading. You'll go on a vacation, you'll get sick, you'll get injured.
My deloads.
Yeah, so, but I always like to say this, okay, you're accumulating fatigue, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if you lift 2 days a week? Do you ever get so beat down that you need a deload? You know, what if you don't train? I mean, I've got a lot of colleagues that don't work out that hard, and they look great, and they don't deload. What if you don't ever train outstrip your recovery, and you use really good form, and you don't get these micro injuries that need to be repaired? Mm-hmm. But in general, people are like too hard. So you got the sedentary people who need to work out more, and they represent a huge portion of the population. But then you have the psychos like us who were like addicted to exercise, and most of the fitness industry is like that. We're too hardcore. You should not fear losing your gains by training easy for a week. Now on my deloads, I don't like to program, David, I want you to do 135 for 5 sets of 10 on the bench press or something, you know, mm-hmm. Even though that would be so easy for you. I just like to say, look, if you think of your whole workout on a scale of 1 to 10, have your deload be a 5 or a 6. Don't push it too hard. Don't take anything to failure. Some exercises like isolation lifts you can go a little harder on, but the goal of that week is to relax and recover, and not just recover physiologically, but psychologically. How hard can you, if you're going for PRs, week in and week out, if you're running on nerve, how long can that work? You know, you got to have easier weeks. Well, you don't have to have easier weeks. I just explained where you don't. If you're training 2 days a week, or say you train 4 days a week, but you don't really go that hard. But if you go for PRs and you really push it hard, then you should have a deload week. I like to do it 1 every 4 weeks. Some people say once every 8 weeks.
That also comes with training experience.
Yes.
So you know when you're really like.
But like I don't deload. I take, and then there's this whole who says it has to be a whole week?
Yeah.
What if you're feeling run down and you take 2 days off from the gym and then start back up, or have 3 easy days and then start back up? So there's a lot of, the way people do it. There's a lot of tradition in strength and conditioning, and people don't think outside the box enough to realize there's so many ways to do things and still see good results.
So you recently put out a video called "The Hip Thrust is the Main Lift." Obviously, there's a lot of criticism from guys, especially. They think the hip thrust is like gay, which doesn't make any sense at all. Why should men and women both train glutes and do hip thrusts?
Gosh, it's funny because when I grew up trying to learn about glutes, I mean, I've been prioritizing glutes since I was like 16 years old, when I had none. I had nothing. My back went right into my legs, and I was very insecure about that and self-conscious about it. And I tried to study glutes. Good luck back then finding anything. We didn't have the internet back then, so you had to learn through muscle magazines, and there wasn't a glute day. It was, you had, a chest day, a back day, a shoulder day, a leg day, and an arm day. And legs were quads and hams. And no one talked about glutes. It was just assumed your glutes would get big if you trained legs. And for a lot of guys, they did. Mm-hmm. But, when you had a competitor that needed to bring up his glutes, but I would just look at the routines that they did and try to mimic them. But I'd always keep my eye out for additional information. And so, this is probably TMI, but like during my 20s, whenever I'd like get a new girlfriend or whatever, like they'd see my body and they'd comment like, wow, it's so nice to see some muscular, I mean, I'm sure most lifters can relate, like who train lower body. It's so nice to see that you have nice legs and glutes. My last boyfriend had this big chest and big arms and these little twig legs. And I'm like, why would anyone do that? Like,
Jamie, can we confirm that girls like glutes too?
Yeah, definitely.
There we go.
So first of all, the opposite sex likes glutes, whether you're male or female. But I realize that's not the main reason why you should do it. You should do it also for athleticism. You should do it for injury prevention. The glutes are very involved in everything athletic. For example, sprinting, jumping, cutting side to side, swinging, rotating, climbing. But also, they're kind of, you think of like a muscular anatomy chart. The glutes are the centerpiece, the keystone. They tie a lot of things together. They've got connections to the sacrum, to the pelvis, through the IT band. They can almost be thought of as, because they attach to the tibia through the IT band. Mm-hmm. You can think of the IT band as a tendon on down to this, so they cross the knee joint there. Through the thoracolumbar fascia, they transfer into the upper body. Through the lats, if you consider through the lats, they get to the shoulder. The deep fibers connect to the pelvic floor muscles. So you've got a lot of, and the glutes are unique in that 70 to 85% of the attachments are to fascia. You've only got about 15 to 25, 15 to like 30% of the attachments to onto the bone, onto the femur. So they do a lot of things. They influence how the body handles stress, and so if you use your glutes and you have strong glutes, you'll tend to maybe put less, and your mechanics matter too. You have to learn proper form, especially with like landing and cutting side to side and stuff. But if you have well-functioning glutes, you tend to put less stress on the anterior hips, less stress on the knees, less stress on the low back. And so it helps you function better too.
Yeah, so in my experience, I've had that issue where when I was squatting, like most of the pressure would like go onto my knees. So I started hip thrusting, and I found out that I was stronger in squats, less hip pain, and then less knee pain too, because like obviously the glutes help you get out of the hole, right?
Yeah, and that video rubbed some people the wrong way. Maybe I was a little too harsh, but I truly believe that because a lot of people were like, it just matters how you do the exercise, like as if every exercise is equally as inherently. And these people don't own a gym. They don't work with a ton of people like I do.
Yeah.
Some exercises are more dangerous than others, and if you don't know that, I can't have a discussion with you. And that's what I read some of these comments, and it's like, the squat is not unsafe. Those people don't progressive overload. They don't go for PRs. Like, those people tend to get to a certain point and lift the same amount the rest of their lives. Same with deadlifts. Like, I love the squat and the deadlift. Hell, I'd love to squat 500 pounds, and I just hit 455 a deep squat, and I'd love to get to 500 pounds. I think I could get to a 650 deadlift. I just pulled 585 really easy sumo, and I'm like, I'm gonna start climbing. Like, I'm still going for PRs and I'm 42 years old, but I know that it's way more risky than like going for a heavy hip thrust.
Yeah.
And
like with squats, obviously you go heavy. There's
just
knee
more,
valgus or the
there's more
the weight
stuff that
crushes
can go
you.
wrong. You get to the bottom, and that's why they're so awesome. And I'm not telling people don't squat or don't deadlift,
Right.
but what I'll tell you is that we had 0 injuries this year at Glute Lab. The trainers, we hurt ourselves in our training, in our own lifting, because we're overzealous.
Yes.
But with our clients, we didn't have a single injury in a whole year. And I think that's probably never been done, where you have a gym that trained people heavy. These girls are strong. And we have guy clients too, and they are strong, and they move a lot of weight.
Yep.
But we prioritize the hip thrust, the leg press, the straddle lift. And the straddle lift is like, it's a deadlift, but you do it with the weight in between your legs.
Yeah.
We do it off with the T-bell, with the loading pin, and we do it over there with the pit shark, where people do belt squats on. We use it for straddle lifts, and they go real deep. It's kind of like a mixture between a squat and a deadlift, because you're going real deep and the weight is in between your legs. We pushed those, and then we do squat variations, we do deadlift variation, we do tons of single leg work, we do tons of abduction work, we do tons of posterior chain work. But it's like no one was chasing. The reason why squats and deadlifts can be hard, can be dangerous, is because you're gonna have that. Remember I said earlier, you're gonna have a bad day here and there. And when you have that bad day, and you're like, all weekend you were like mentally rehearsing that lift, like I'm going for 495 for 10, I'm going for that 315 for 10 reps squat, or I'm going for that 545 pound for 5 rep deadlift, or like some PR, whatever it is. Say you're a woman and you've never hit 225 pound deadlift and you want to try it next week. And then you warm up and you do your first kind of like hard working set, or like warm up set, and you're like, this just doesn't feel right. Maybe I shouldn't do it. It's hard to walk away. And a lot of times you can just brute force. You're not stronger, but you just round your back, or like let your form go to hell and just use brute force. You weren't really stronger, you just let your form slide.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you're fine. Try that 3 weeks in a row, snap city. You're gonna snap something up.
And the day's gonna come, you gonna fucking snap your shit in half.
And so it's like the list that you care about, because no one's like stubborn about a lat pull down or a seated row. Mm-hmm. You're not gonna be like, I don't care, this doesn't feel right, but I'm going for it anyway. Those you tend to just, but also some are more dangerous. And if you really get into the biomechanics of it, you have more joint forces, there's more muscles involved, there's more compressive and shear loading on the spine and things like that. And you have anatomical restrictions. If you go too deep in a squat, you can butt wink. Maybe it's fine, but when you try a new 1 rep max or go into failure on it, going for a PR, maybe a certain muscle fatigues and you have to round more, or your knee buckles, something can happen. You can also lose your balance on those. People don't lose their balance a lot on squats and deadlifts as much as like single leg movements, but what I mean is you can you've seen these horror videos of people like going down, like powerlifters, going down a squat. But I don't want to use fear tactics like powerlifters have hurt themselves. Because in my gym, we squat and deadlift. So I didn't get enough time. I tried to make a shorter video and it backfired on me. The first video was 22 minutes long. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So then I did it again. It was 16 minutes. And then I did it a third time and it was like 9 minutes. So I should have elaborated. I love squats and deadlifts. Do your squats and deadlifts, but don't be obsessed with them like a lot of powerlifters. I have strongs with some freakishly strong powerlifters, and they're always getting injured and training around injuries and things like that. And they love it, and they accept those risks, and that's fine if you're a powerlifter. But if you're trying to build your glutes, then you don't have to prioritize them to the same degree. Do them with really good form. Utilize the mind-muscle connection. Don't be so obsessed with PRs, and instead make hip thrust your number one goal. But not everyone loves hip thrust, but usually there's a hip thrust variation, bands or B stance or single leg or barbell glute bridges or something like that, or find the lifts that feel best to you, prioritize those, and then the lifts that maybe are more dangerous or don't feel as good. I think if more people did that, they'd see better results just through training longevity, not being hurt. And of course, if you do squats and deads, it doesn't mean you're going to get hurt. But a lot of the people who said, "Oh, I've never gotten hurt on squats and deads," they don't tend to push it as hard.
Yeah.
One vocal guy in the industry is like, I heard him like, squats are so safe if you do them right, and it's like he's been squatting for 10 years and he uses 185. And I didn't want to be mean. I didn't say anything. I wanted to be like, oh, you squat with 185. Like, I don't know. Anyway, I could go on and on, but you get the point.
I get it. And I think we pretty much covered everything. Unless there was anything else you wanted to add, that was all I had.
We're good.
Cool. Thanks for coming on, Bret.
Thanks for having me.